This is the story of Grace Kelly. To the world, she was a movie star, an icon of cool blonde elegance, and later a real-life princess. The actor James Stewart, her close friend and co-star, was once asked a question that revealed the unique nature of her life. He was asked if he thought she would ever return to Hollywood, to return to the world of movies. His answer was simple and profound. He replied, "Why should she? We only make believe, but she is the real thing." Those words capture the essence of Grace Patricia Kelly. She was born in the autumn of a certain year in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into a world of substantial wealth and high expectations. Her parents were John and Margaret Kelly. Her father, John B. Kelly Sr., was the owner of a multi-million-dollar brickwork contracting company, a self-made man who had built an empire from the ground up. But his daughter's fame would eventually eclipse his own considerable accomplishments. Known to his friends as Jack, Grace's father was also a legendary athlete, a triple Olympic gold medalist in the sport of sculling, a form of rowing. He first stood on the Olympic podium in the early part of the 20th century and repeated the feat just a few years later, achieving a level of physical excellence that few could dream of. To this day, a monument stands in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, honoring the athletic achievements of Jack Kelly. Grace's mother, Margaret, was no less accomplished in the world of sports. She was a gifted swimmer and became the first ever coach of the women's athletic team at the University of Pennsylvania, a testament to her pioneering spirit and her belief in physical rigor and discipline. Into this intensely competitive and ambitious household, Grace was born, the third of 4 children. She had 2 older siblings, a sister named Margaret and a brother named John Jr. A younger sister named Elizabeth would complete the family a few years after Grace's arrival. The same year Grace was born, her father constructed the family's grand home on Henry Avenue in the affluent and leafy section of East Falls, Philadelphia. It was a house built to impress, a statement of the Kelly family's success and their place in society. Within these walls, the young Grace would grow up, surrounded by love, but also by the immense pressure of being a Kelly. She was sent to attend the Ravenhill Academy, a prestigious Catholic girls' school where young ladies from good families were polished and prepared for their futures. On weekends, Grace, along with her mother and her sister, would sometimes model fashions at local events, displaying a natural grace and poise that set her apart even then. The young Grace possessed a vivid imagination. Her family thought it was an endearing trait, a cute quirk. She would often announce with a seriousness that amused the adults around her that when she grew up, she was going to be a famous actress. She would disappear into her own world, creating characters and stories. However, by the time she graduated from a socially prominent private institute in Northwest Philadelphia around the middle of the 20th century, that childhood imagination was no longer considered cute. Her father, in particular, was deeply opposed to the idea of the stage. He expressed a harsh and common sentiment of his era, believing that the life of an actress was morally questionable, one step above a life of disrepute. An acting career was simply not something a respectable Kelly daughter should pursue. Despite this family opposition, Grace's passion could not be extinguished. During her high school years, she had acted in dance recitals and school plays, proving her natural talent. Her high school yearbook listed her favorite actors as the sophisticated Joseph Cotten and the luminous Ingrid Bergman, early clues to the kind of star she would one day become. In a section filled with predictions for the graduates, the prophecy next to Grace Patricia Kelly's name read simply, a famous star of stage and screen. It was a declaration that would prove uncannily accurate. It was at this crucial moment that her famous uncle, George Kelly, stepped in. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, a man of immense literary and theatrical prestige. Where her father saw disgrace, her uncle saw potential. He encouraged her to consider a different path, one that didn't rely solely on vocal projection on a live stage. He suggested she try her hand in Hollywood, in the new and powerful medium of motion pictures. With his blessing and guidance, she decided to make the journey west. She started with a few uncredited extra parts, the kind of roles that are easy to miss on the screen. But in the early 1950s, she landed a minor role in a film about a man threatening to jump from a skyscraper. The movie itself was forgettable, but one very important thing came out of it. The legendary actor Gary Cooper spotted her on the set. He was immediately taken with her beauty, and more importantly, her graceful and composed manners. He saw something special in her, a quality of quiet strength and refined charm. So, when the producers of his next picture were searching for an actress to play his wife, Cooper gave them no argument. Despite the significant difference in their ages, she was just starting out, and he was a seasoned star. Grace was cast. That film was a classic Western. She played the wife of a town marshal, a Quaker and a pacifist, trying desperately to convince her husband to give up his badge and his gun. A killer he had sent to prison years ago was returning on the noon train, sworn to seek revenge. The story unfolded in real time, building to an inevitable and tense climax. For the young actress just finding her feet in Hollywood, it was a dream debut. She didn't know it at the time, but this role would open a door that would launch her into the stratosphere of movie stardom. Her performance in that classic Western brought her immediate acclaim. Soon after, she was offered a role that would take her far from the sound stages of Los Angeles. She was cast opposite two of the biggest stars in the world in a romantic adventure film set in the wilds of Africa. The film was to be shot partly on location in Kenya, a rugged and exotic environment. It was directed by the famously irascible but brilliant John Ford. During the filming, she became involved in a discreet romance with her charismatic leading man. He was so taken with her that he moved to a hotel away from the rest of the cast, a place where Grace could visit him quietly, away from the prying eyes of the press and the crew. The affair continued until her mother made a surprise visit to the set, putting a swift end to the romantic interlude. Later, when reporters asked her if there had been a romance, she answered with a witty, flirtatious remark. She said, with a twinkle in her eye, "If you're in a tent alone in Africa with Clark Gable, what else is there to do?" It was the kind of charming, evasive answer that would become her trademark. For her performance in that African adventure, she received her first nomination for an Academy Award. Though she would not win the statuette that year, the industry had taken serious notice. She did, however, win a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress, a significant achievement that cemented her rising status. Shortly afterward, she was offered a long-term contract with a major studio, earning a comfortable weekly salary. The studio had a policy of lending their stars out to other studios, recognizing that if their actors became exceedingly popular elsewhere, the home studio would reap the benefits in terms of prestige and future earnings. So, not long after signing her contract, she was lent to another studio for a film directed by a master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. The film was a tense thriller about a husband who plots to murder his unfaithful wife. The director had first tried to secure a different well-known actress for the part, but she was tied up with another picture. He then approached another talented star, but she demanded too much money. Finally, he settled on Grace. The film was shot quickly in less than a month and was released to positive reviews. It was her first collaboration with Hitchcock, but it would not be her last. Her next movie was also directed by Alfred Hitchcock, a film that would become one of the most celebrated in his entire career. She starred opposite James Stewart, her future friend who would speak those memorable words about her. The film was set almost entirely within a single apartment courtyard, and an enormous replica of a real apartment complex was built on a soundstage. Grace played a glamorous society girlfriend who becomes drawn into her wheelchair-bound boyfriend's voyeuristic investigation of a possible murder across the way. On set, Grace was known to be a flirt, especially with her leading men. She even flirted with Jimmy Stewart, much to the amusement of the crew. Stewart's wife was always present on set, however, ensuring that the flirtation remained harmless and professional. The crew noted that the older, seasoned actor got a real kick out of her playful attention. The director, who had experienced difficult relationships with powerful producers in the past, took a small act of revenge through his film. He modeled the appearance of the murderer in the movie to closely resemble one of those producers he had clashed with. Many film critics and historians would later argue that this particular movie represented the director's finest achievement. Around the same time, another film was released, a sweeping war drama set in the Pacific during a great conflict. Grace played the devoted wife of a Navy pilot, a role that required her to convey deep emotion and resilience. She starred alongside a talented cast, including other major stars of the era. But it was her next performance that would earn her the highest honor in her profession. She was cast in a drama about a troubled singer and his long-suffering wife. She played the wife, a woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to care for her alcoholic husband. It was a dark, gritty, and emotionally demanding role, far removed from the glamorous socialites she had often played. Her home studio was reluctant to lend her to another studio for the part, but she felt so strongly about the script that she threatened to quit acting altogether and return to New York. Faced with the loss of their rising star, the studio gave in. Her gamble paid off spectacularly. For her raw and powerful performance, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress. She had reached the pinnacle of Hollywood success. After coming off such a successful and acclaimed film, her next feature was a romantic adventure set in a South American mine. It was a disappointment by every measure. She later described the filming experience as miserable. Working in a dirty, uncomfortable hut in a remote location. Part of the crew even got shipwrecked while traveling to the set. The film was shot in a matter of days, and the final result was, in her own honest assessment, awful. It was a rare misstep in an otherwise flawless rise to the top. Soon after, once again, she was lent out by her home studio to another production. This would be the film that changed her life forever. She flew to the French Riviera to star opposite the effortlessly suave Cary Grant in a glamorous thriller about a retired jewel thief who must clear his name by catching an imitator. The film was set against the stunning backdrop of the Mediterranean coastline with its azure waters and winding cliffside roads. During the filming, Grace and Cary Grant developed a lasting friendship. Years later, Grant would say that Grace was his favorite actress to work with. He marveled at her serenity, her ability to remain calm and focused amidst the chaos of a film set. Some of the driving scenes, filmed on the curvy roads high above Monte Carlo, were shot on the very same routes that Grace would later travel as a princess. Tragically, those same roads would one day be the site of the accident that took her life. That same year, Grace attended a world-famous film festival in the south of France. It was there, during a photo shoot at the royal palace of the tiny Principality of Monaco, that she met Prince Rainier III for the first time. Initially, she was not particularly interested in meeting the prince. She was there to promote her movies, not to find a husband. However, after spending some time in his company, she changed her mind. She found the prince to be charming, intelligent, and serious about his duties. When she returned to the United States, she began a private correspondence with Rainier, a letter-writing relationship that grew deeper over time. Ironically, around this same period, she was playing a princess in a different movie, a romantic comedy set in a fictional European kingdom. Life was beginning to imitate art. Not long after, Prince Rainier traveled to the United States to visit Grace at her family home in Philadelphia. There is a famous family photograph from that visit showing the Kellys gathered with the prince. It was during this visit that the prince asked Grace to marry him. The story goes that Grace's father, the fiercely proud and plain-spoken Jack Kelly, told the prince, "We are Americans and we don't go much for that prince stuff." He was initially skeptical of royalty and titles, but he eventually gave his blessing. Grace would finish her last film, a musical remake of a classic comedy, starring alongside Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. Then, at the height of her fame, at only 26 years old, she gave up her Hollywood career. She had starred in only a handful of films over a period of about 5 years. Yet she had made a deeper and more lasting impression than many stars who had been in the movies for decades. With dozens of family members and close friends, Grace left New York Harbor, sailing across the Atlantic Ocean on a grand ocean liner, bound for the French Riviera and her new life as a princess. It was reported that her family paid a substantial dowry before the wedding could proceed. The wedding itself was a 2-day affair. First came a civil ceremony, followed the next day by a grand religious ceremony at the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Monaco. Her former studio had dozens of seamstresses working for weeks on her wedding gown, and the studio gave the gown to the princess as a wedding present. In return for allowing Grace out of her long-term contract, the prince permitted the studio to film the wedding, which was broadcast live on television and watched by tens of millions of people around the world. It was a fairy tale event that captured the global imagination. The royal couple left the same day for a long honeymoon cruise on the Mediterranean Sea, sailing on the prince's private yacht. Years later, the couple's son, Prince Albert, would reveal a charming and human detail about that first night. He said his parents told him that they were so exhausted by the whirlwind of the wedding celebrations that once they got on the yacht, they both collapsed from sheer fatigue. It was not until the next day that they could properly begin their honeymoon. The prince was in his 30s and Grace was in her 20s. There was a significant political reality to their marriage. The ancient Principality of Monaco had an agreement with France that if the ruling monarch failed to produce an heir, the principality would revert to French control. The future of the Grimaldi dynasty rested on the couple having children. The pressures of royalty soon gave way to the joys of parenthood. Their first child, a daughter named Caroline, was born just over 9 months after the wedding. A little over a year after Caroline's birth, their second child and first son, Prince Albert, was born. He would one day inherit the throne. Grace ensured that her children maintained a connection to her American roots. She allowed them to spend time visiting her parents at the Kelly family home in Philadelphia. Many years later, when Prince Albert reached a mature age and became the ruler of the principality after his father's passing, he would purchase that same Kelly family home in Philadelphia as a permanent tribute to his mother's memory. He restored it and opened it to the public as a museum, allowing visitors from around the world to see where Grace Kelly had grown up. Shortly after becoming sovereign, Prince Albert chose his own bride, a former Olympic swimmer, much as his father had chosen a Hollywood star. It was reported that Prince Albert was considered one of the wealthiest monarchs in Europe. Not long after Grace's father passed away at the age of 70, her mother, Margaret, lived a long life, passing away in her early 90s. Throughout her years as Princess of Monaco, Grace was offered several movie roles. She always turned them down, committed to her duties and her new identity. But one old friend made an especially tempting offer. Her former director, Alfred Hitchcock, offered her a then astronomical sum of $1 million to star in a new psychological thriller. At first, she said yes to Mr. Hitchcock. The prospect of working with the master of suspense again was thrilling. However, when the citizens of Monaco objected to their princess returning to the screen, she listened. She said she would not disappoint her people. With great regret, she pulled out of the movie. She explained that she now had obligations and duties as a princess and a mother, and those had to come first. The role was then offered to another actress, who became a star in her own right. Grace and Rainier had a third child, a daughter named Stephanie. The following years were filled with the demanding work of raising 3 children in the relentless spotlight of international media. The entire world looked on and judged their every move. It was a tremendous strain, not only for Grace, but also for her children. Gossip magazines had a field day with Caroline's, Albert's, and Stephanie's romances and marriages. None of the tabloid speculation was more bitter or more persistent than the stories surrounding the tragic death of Princess Grace. It happened on a morning in early autumn. Princess Grace and her 17-year-old daughter, Princess Stephanie, were making preparations to leave their official family retreat, a beautiful country home located just across the border in France, high in the mountains above Monaco. The chauffeur brought the family's car to the front of the house. The chauffeur later stated that Grace came out of the house with her arms full of dresses, and the maids followed with more dresses and hat boxes, enough to fill the entire back seat. The chauffeur told her that he could take the dresses down to the palace in a separate trip, and then return to pick up her and Stephanie. He knew that Grace did not particularly enjoy driving, but Grace declined the offer. She said it was too much trouble. She would simply drive herself and her daughter. Around mid-morning, they began the 35-minute journey from the country retreat down the winding mountain roads to the palace in Monaco. The car approached a hill leading down to a notorious hairpin turn, a curve known locally as the Devil's Curve. According to a driver who was traveling about 50 yards behind the princess's car, when Grace's car started down the hill, it began to swerve from side to side. This strange behavior gave rise to tabloid speculation that Grace might have been drinking, or that she and Stephanie might have been fighting over a romantic relationship. Stephanie, at that age, wanted to marry a young man, the son of a famous French movie star. The driver behind the princess said that he started blowing his horn several times, thinking to alert a driver who might have been falling asleep. Then, he said, the car stopped swerving and sped up. He said that he knew at that speed the car could not possibly make the sharp curve ahead. He also noted that no brake lights ever came on. This account substantiated Princess Stephanie's later description of the accident. Stephanie said that shortly after leaving the house, Grace started complaining that her head hurt. The pain continued to bother her. Stephanie said that while going down the hill, Grace grabbed her head in pain. She seemed to black out for a second, then came to, but she sped up instead of slowing down. Stephanie did not know if Grace had lost control of her legs or if she thought she was pushing the brake pedal when in fact she was pushing the accelerator. Stephanie tried to stop the car herself by pulling up the parking brake and jamming the gear shift into the park position. Mechanics who later examined the wrecked car confirmed that the gearbox was indeed in park. The car broke through a low stone wall and plunged over 100 feet down a steep embankment. A gardener working nearby heard the terrible crash and rushed to help. He said that Stephanie was crawling out of the driver's side of the wreckage. This gave rise to a persistent belief that Stephanie had actually been driving. However, other witnesses said they had seen Grace behind the wheel just before the crash. Neither woman was wearing a seatbelt. Stephanie later explained that the passenger door on her side was crushed shut, and she woke up trapped under the dashboard. She had to climb out through the driver's side. Her mother, she said, had been pushed by the steering column into the rear seat. Stephanie called for help from a nearby house, pleading with the residents to call the palace for assistance. She told them that her mother was still in the car and that it was Princess Grace. She later said, with a heartbreaking sense of disbelief, "I don't think they believed me." When help finally arrived, rescuers removed Grace from the car. She was still unconscious. Both women were taken to the hospital in Monaco, a medical center that would later be named the Princess Grace Center in her honor. Doctors at the hospital performed a scan and determined that Princess Grace had suffered a stroke, a sudden brain hemorrhage that had impaired her driving ability at the worst possible moment. The next day, around late evening, Princess Grace of Monaco passed away at the age of 52. A post-mortem examination confirmed that she had suffered a massive brain hemorrhage. Her daughter Stephanie suffered numerous injuries in the crash. She was not told of her mother's death until several days later, as doctors feared the shock would impede her recovery. Stephanie would refuse to speak about the accident for a long time, which gave rise to endless speculation. She finally gave details of the crash after several years had passed, but she would still not say if she and her mother had been arguing over her boyfriend just before the accident. Some newspapers even hinted that Stephanie was partly responsible for her mother's death. It is a cruel and unfair suggestion. Arguments between a mother and her teenage daughter over a boyfriend are a common occurrence in families around the world. But a common argument does not cause a stroke. It does not cause a massive brain hemorrhage. The medical evidence was clear. Grace Kelly had suffered a catastrophic medical event behind the wheel. The car crash was a consequence, not a cause. Princess Grace was buried at the Cathedral of St. Nicholas, the same beautiful stone cathedral where nearly 3 decades earlier she had been married in a fairy tale ceremony watched by the world. Her husband, Prince Rainier, did not remarry. He mourned her for the rest of his life. More than 2 decades after his wife's death, the prince passed away himself, succumbing to heart and lung problems. He was buried in the Grimaldi family vault, in the crypt of the same cathedral, right next to his beloved Grace. He was in his early 80s. The story of Grace Kelly did not end with a simple fade to black, like one of her movies. It ended with tragedy, but also with a legacy that has only grown with time. She remains an enduring icon of elegance, grace under pressure, and the strange, unpredictable journey that life can take. She was a girl from Philadelphia who dreamed of being an actress, who became a movie star, and who then walked away from it all to become a real-life princess. James Stewart was right. We only make believe. But she was the real thing,